What is man that thou art mindful of him, and son of man that thou visitest him? For thou hast made him a little lower than the angels, and hast crowned him with glory and honor. Thou madest him to have dominion over the works of thy hands. Thou hast put all things under his feet. O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. Amen.
Now he's waxing poetic, but what colossal self-importance. See, it looks like he's praising the Lord, but the whole thing is about himself and his position in the cosmos. Shout out to my subs. Part 1. I had to go to a real library for this one. And go. If you search humanism on Wikipedia, it will rightly point out that what people mean when they talk about humanism is a non-theistic life stance centered on human agency and looking to science rather than revelation from a supernatural source to understand the world. That is, the human of humanism is over against a god of theism. Perfect. And yeah, no. That's a weak definition, as most theisms are thoroughly humanist. And this anti-theist definition is inheriting a legacy, then trying to erase it after the fact. God and humans evolved together as concepts in intellectual history. A lot of what we believe about humans, for example, that we deserve rights, freedoms, and so on, requires an external pivot from which humans are bestowed with an inalienable dignity. An intellectual history, this was God's function. So let's philosophize with a hammer. First talking about humanism in this video, and then covering post-humanism in the next. It only makes sense to explain a shift, even this reductively, if we have a before and an after. So, humanism. The humanism or humanist genealogy that I'm tracing out is particularly Western, which is not at all to say the concepts only originated in the West, or that other philosophical traditions did not theorize about the same concepts, but rather that modern humanism in liberal democracy is only intelligible as a confluence of the Christian worldview and its evolution throughout the discrete nation states in early modern Western Europe. Just as one example, this is where the language of constitutions and legal rights and freedoms developed. And these were often the theoretical offspring of a rising bourgeoisie intellectual class, 17th century. Now, the central tenet of humanisms is that there's a unique, special place for humans in the cosmos. Oh, doesn't that hit the feels? You're special. This belief is otherwise known as human exceptionalism. As humans, we are differentiated from the rest of creation based on essential abstract capacities, including free will, individual agency, rationality, and subjectivity. The rest of stuff is ruled by law and instinct. It is called nature, big N. This is what's under our feet. Here's the genealogy I'm tracking when I talk about humanism. I am being reductive and cherry picking, but remember this is a YouTube video. Patristic humanism. These are the church fathers who decided what Christianity was going to be. They sort of kicked off humanism by accident while theorizing about how Christ is God and also human. This is different from other religions and philosophies in that Christ is not God pretending to be a man. A lot of other gods did this. This is Zeus, rapist Zeus. And also not half god, half human, which were the products of these rapes. This is Heracles, for example. No, the patristic humanists decided that Christ is substantially, that is, in essence, actually human. Not everyone agreed with this, including some Gnostics and Docetists, but they were eventually called heretics and scrubbed from the record. You can already see how this bestows human essence with a lot of importance, as no other god would stoop so low as to become human, and then even more obscenely to die while being human. But if all this really did happen, that in turn makes this substance barrier between nature and supernature passable, which allows humans to be more godlike by doing Christ-like things. Nice work, guys. This is Athanasius, who theologized that God was at one and the same time, this is the wonder, as man. He was living a human life, and not even his birth from a virgin therefore changed him in any way, nor was he defiled by being in the body. This kicked off the particular history of human self-importance known as humanism. And as Christianity got around, so did this seminal transcendence of humans from nature. Now, there's some debate as to how peculiar this actually was to Christianity. Some scholars think that the concept was originally Greek or Eastern, but the figure of the incarnation, full man, full God, gives human dignity a practical thrust that didn't play out elsewhere to the same extent. Fast forward to the Renaissance, 11 centuries later. What about me? Shut up, Abelard. Also a rapist. Allegedly. Renaissance humanism articulated a godly unction towards being involved in this world, the human world, towards a type we might call a civic human, one that should be culturally engaged, educated, and creative, at least if you are a man and have some money backing you. The goal of the civic human is to be virtuous or godlike on earth, not waiting around praying that you'll get into heaven. Civility here explicitly aims to increase the separation of man from nature by transcending carnal instincts and blind rule following. Society becomes a distinct domain of particularly human will. For example, the nature of all other creatures is defined and restricted within laws which God has laid down. Man, by contrast, impeded by no such restrictions, may by his own free will trace for himself the lineaments of his own nature. Man is at the very center of the world. So humans, because they can become civil, are more important than anything else in creation, and this special transcendence comes from a divine investment of free will, along with the responsibility to act in the world, that is, to create culture as distinct from nature. The seed blooms further down the line in the Enlightenment, where God is given a back seat in organizing daily civic affairs, at least more than ever before. This can be seen as a material result of the emerging bourgeoisie class, which wasn't so down with God's involvement in society, particularly because he always seemed to be on the side of the landed aristocracy and the clergy. The bourgeoisie philosophers separated church from state as a way to curb the power of their rivals, at least that's the dialectical interpretation, and to get religious sectarians to stop killing each other. This was the beginning of the idea of liberal tolerance. They were still Christians, though. What about me? Shut up, Hume. You're ruining my narrative. This is where liberal humanism comes to take a seat in the modern nation state, and should look familiar to those of us in liberal representative democracies now run by this heir of the bourgeoisie doctrine. 1. Social contract theory, according to which societies exist because of human rationality as opposed to something like a natural disposition or divine ordination. Humans rationally decide to transcend their own nature in this Hobbesian origin myth, and set up a government to stop others' self-interestedness from getting out of hand and interfering with your self-interestedness. 2. Liberalism and democracy, where humans are free, rational, and essentially equal. They can be trusted to make rational decisions in the pursuit of equality. Thus, if you meet a basic standard of responsibility, that is, owning land and still not being a woman, then you are allowed to elect your leaders. And last, 3, the labor theory of value. Classical capitalism, though not contemporary capitalism, and communism, though not state socialism, where human will and activity are that which create value in the world, thus giving rise to liberal markets where value can be exchanged. So we've just run through 15 centuries of humanism, and never has humanism yet been opposed to theism. In each case, human exceptionalism forms the foundations of modern liberal democratic institutions, such as legal systems, public education, and public elections, at least in theory. Oops. 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 Big oops. At the very least, this sort of humanism is what distinguishes modern states from those governed by the divine right of kings or god emperors. Humanism is fundamentally anthropocentric. We get our bubble here, which differentiates us from all the things that are not us. And then we put all of these things inside our bubble with us. A lot of the time, when it served them, these old guys put biological humans outside of the bubble, either saying they were not civil or not rational. But over time, you end up with the sorts of definitions that define our institutions today, including universal suffrage. It's getting kind of old, right? That humans are uniquely rational or responsible gives rise to ethical philosophy, to doctrines of tolerance, to state welfare policies, any theory of universal human rights, and also to modern philosophical movements like existentialism or secular humanism. And it is always the basis for terms like rights and freedoms, individualism, liberalism, socialism, pro-life, pro-choice, and any debate over social justice or equality. In sum, humans believe humans are exceptional, that they transcend natural forces, usually by positing free will, and that they are conscious of their history and thus can create political projects and goals to realize themselves either as individuals or groups of individuals. Thus, as humans, they have innate value and political rights, which leads to some sense of responsibility to each other and for nature. Yeah, I'm tired of it too. You can see all of these ideas actualized in the constitutions of modern liberal democracies, bound by the permanence of the written word. This will prove to be important in part 2. Today, virtually all public discourse assumes a humanist position. And as basic as it seems, as self-evident as it seems, justice has only briefly been considered a matter of individual responsibility. For example, offense by a member of a group was, for most of human history, an offense by that whole group. Accordingly, the whole group could be punished. For example, in Romeo and Juliet, in which the writer, Shakespeare, who some have argued invented the modern human, R.I.P. Harold, R.I.P. Shakespeare demonstrates a tension between group identity and particular identities, ultimately moralizing for the latter. Although this tension is certainly not resolved today, our modern legal systems almost exclusively consider individuals responsible, such that it would be absurd for us to punish negligent parents for the crimes of their offspring, despite the overwhelming fact that they play a causal role in social behavior or maladaptation. Nevertheless, I'm not going to brood on this point too much. I mean only to point out that modern democratic institutions assume much of individual humans and their agency, and they are responsible for their actions, that they are rational, and that they have free will, all rooted in humanism. This may seem totally obvious to you, self-evident even, and if that is the case, it is likely you have never thought to doubt it. And if you haven't, you're probably a humanist. But that's not the only option on the intellectual shelf these days. Oh, you're still here. That's quite an attention span you have. Can't you see I'm doing research? Just click here and I'll meet you in the next video.